Election aftermath gets a bit contentious for all parties involved. The old guard of the Democrats is now officially uprooted by the new progressive generation and one old senator. And the Supreme Court argues tariffs with the Trump administration. I'm Tony Kinnett, host of the Daily Signal's Tony Kinnett Cast, syndicated nationally at 7 p.m. Eastern. It is Thursday, November 6th, 2025. This is the Daily Signal's top news in 10. No time was wasted after the off-year election of 2025, getting into some rather contentious territory. Zoran Mamdani, the Democrat mayor-elect of New York City, gave his victory speech by quoting the self-professed Bolshevist Eugene V. Debs.
The sun may have set over our city this evening, but as Eugene Debs once said, I can see the dawn of a better day for humanity.
He announced that the people of New York, well, certain people in New York were free of their shackles, going off on a list of multicultural micro groups, per se. And after tearing into the traditional political system he claimed was oppressing many in the city, Zoran ended by saying there would be no problem too big or too small for the government to look in on.
We will prove that there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about.
This was how CNN's Van Jones, who had previously been very praiseworthy of Mamdani, reacted to Zoran Mamdani's speech.
But I think he missed an opportunity. I think the Mamdani that we saw on the campaign trail, who was a lot more calm, who was a lot warmer, who was a lot more embracing, was not present in that speech. And I think that Mamdani is the one you need to hear from tonight.
And that's not the only contention. To announce that the new generation of progressives was truly ready to take over, Senator Bernie Sanders, the progressive and self-ascribed Democrat socialist of Vermont, took Chuck Schumer's podium after Chuck was late for a press briefing yesterday afternoon to announce that it was finally time for the establishment, who didn't support any of the prior candidates in primaries, to step aside and let the progressives take over. Check it out.
That's a good sign. I agree with it.
What are your takeaways from last
My takeaways is there are many reasons why people win an election and lose an election. What happens in Virginia or New Jersey and New York City is a bit different.
For more on this and the broader trend of Democrat and Republican politics moving forward after the 2025 off-year elections, we sat down with Daily Signal President Rob Bluey for a bit of perspective on where we can go forward from here and those who might be seen as the new guard for the party. Rob Bluey, president of the Daily Signal, and in our swampy nation capital on this interesting Wednesday evening. Tell me, Rob, is everyone just gloom and doom in DC on Capitol Hill? What's kind of the vibe you're getting?
Well, Tony, I will answer that question in just a moment, but I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate you on an outstanding election night show. We're so proud to work with you and your team. It was phenomenal. The best coverage you could find among any news organization, the guests that you had, including our own stars and talent here at the Daily Signal. So thank you for that. I wanted to make sure I got that out right up front. Second, doom and gloom. Yeah, there's a certain extent of that. I mean, the President Trump hosted the Republican senators at the White House this morning. The president is clearly at the point where he is showing his annoyance with the government shutdown, blaming the government shutdown for the Republican losses in the states last night. I'm not sure that that's the entirety of what happened, but certainly I expect it was a factor in Virginia, maybe by the overwhelming margin that Abigail Spanberger was able to defeat Winsome Earl Sears. But yeah, it's a wake-up call for sure. Republicans need to make sure that they don't have a repeat of this in 2026, or otherwise the president's final 2 years of his term are going to be not pleasant. Let's just put it that way.
I've seen a lot of national focus on the New York City mayoral, and we've covered that a little bit earlier in the show, so we're not going to get too much into it. Earlier on in the show, though, I did make a reference last night to Buffalo, New York, and the mayoral race over that way. There were a lot of smaller elections last night that didn't steal the show, that have a lot of people maybe looking over their shoulders. Of course, we saw the Pennsylvania retention of their Supreme Court justices, all three Democrats, all three retained. Of course, we saw as well the Georgia special commissioner elections. And then, of course, although maybe not a surprise, though you're from Western New York, Buffalo also going very heavily blue. You can find the link for the rest of that interview down in the description below. And lastly, the Supreme Court of the United States heard oral arguments yesterday on many of the national emergency levied tariffs by the Trump administration. While a lot of the argument occurred between Trump administration's Sawyer and members like Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett on the validity of using national emergencies declared by the executive on certain economic tariffs seemingly having perhaps nothing to do with national security or a major security threat to the United States requiring a national emergency, one Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, the most liberal justice on the bench, had a little bit of trouble keeping up with tariff policy and United States history, confusing Nixon for Abraham Lincoln, and then asking everyone to circle back.
Did any president under TWIA use that language to impose tariffs?
Well, yes, President Nixon's 1971 tariff.
Not a tariff. That wasn't a tariff. It was a licensing agreement during wartime. It was a specific thing. A tariff I'm talking about.
I'm referring to President Nixon's 1971 tariff.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Yes, I thought you meant Lincoln.
Now, on the matters of the debate itself, Gorsuch and Sawyer debated the necessity of executive power to invoke tariffs according to Constitution's allotted power to Congress regarding tariffs.
Through those words, I think you're saying that no, the president doesn't have inherent authority over tariffs in peacetime.
Absolutely. That is, we do not assert that. We say that Congress can delegate that to him, and when Congress does so, as it does when it uses the phrase regulate importation.
I follow all of that.
I agree.
Okay. You emphasize that Congress can always take back its powers. You mentioned that a couple of times. But don't we have a serious retrieval problem here? Because once Congress delegates by a bare majority and the president signs it, and of course every president will sign a law that gives him more authority, Congress can't take that back without a supermajority. And even then, it's going to be veto proof. What president's ever going to give that power back? Pretty rare president.
Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett then clarified why no prior president had used national emergencies as well as the IEEPA regarding tariff use in the last couple of decades.
In January 2023, Congress voted to terminate one of the biggest IEEPA emergencies ever, the COVID emergency, and the president went along with that. So what the statute reflects is there's going to be the ability for a sort of political consensus against a declared emergency.
Well, what happens when the president simply vetoes legislation to try to take these powers back?
Well, he has the authority to veto legislation to terminate a national emergency, for example. I mean, he retains the powers in the background because IEEPA is still on the books. But if he declares an emergency and Congress doesn't like it and passes a joint resolution, yes, he can absolutely veto that.
Yeah, Congress, as a practical matter, can't get this power back once it's handed it over to the president. It's a one-way ratchet toward the gradual but continual accretion of power.
Gorsuch ended up framing this particular debate around a possible Democrat administration, say under Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, using a national emergency at her discretion to declare climate change to be an imminent threat to the United States and then invoke a heavy climate-based tariff on the entire country.
That's a major question, though. Could the president impose a 50% tariff on gas-powered cars and auto parts to deal with the unusual and extraordinary threat from abroad of climate change?
It's very likely that could be done. Very likely.
I think that has to be the logic of your view.
Yeah, in other words, obviously this administration would say that's a hoax, it's not a real crisis, but...
I'm sure you would.
Yes, but that would be a question for Congress under our interpretation, not for the courts.
All right.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett also asked whether or not it would be possible if the court ruled against some of these tariffs. Again, some of the tariffs are not under question, like the U.S. security tariffs against China or the secondary tariffs tariffing countries who buy oil from Russia, for example. Some of these tariffs, though, if they were ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, there would be a question of how that money would then return to those who were tariffed. This is the question that Justice Amy Coney Barrett asked yesterday.
And then if you win, tell me how the reimbursement process would work. Would it be a complete mess? I mean, you're saying before the government promised reimbursement, and now you're saying we know, oh, well, that's rich, but how would this work? It seems to me like it could be a mess.
So the first thing I'd say is that just underscores just how major a question this is. The very fact that you were dealing with this with quotas, there's no refund process to the tunes of billions of dollars or embargoes, but there is here. But for our case, the way it would work is, in this case, the government stipulated for the 5 plaintiffs that they would get the refunds.
We'll be following the rest of the updates on the Supreme Court and this developing argument series, as well as a possible ruling from SCOTUS on the Tony Kinnett Cast. And if you head down to the description before you go, you can subscribe there and not miss a second of our coverage starting at 7 p.m. Eastern for a roundup of the news and nonsense that never seems to stop. I'm Tony Kinnett, and this has been the Daily Signal's Top News in 10. Take care.